My name is Paul Griffin, and I am on the autism spectrum. I'm 28 years old, and I am a graduate of the University of California, Santa Barbara. I have a job, a driver's license, and I live independently. Sounds pretty successful for someone on the autism spectrum, right? Right. Well, this was not always the picture I presented. Think about the people you know who are on the autism spectrum. Some characteristics you may think of would maybe include stereotyped or repetitive speech, highly restricted interests, hypersensitivity to sensory inputs, excessive resistance to change, difficulty understanding others' perspectives. Do these sound familiar? I had all these symptoms. Looking at me now, some of you may think I could not possibly been as afflicted as some of the people you may deal with, but I had so many problems with social and pragmatic skills that some people didn't understand me at all and thought I was mentally challenged. I'm telling you, I was just like most students who are on the autism spectrum. I was in self-contained special education classrooms, not mainstreamed, and told I would never graduate high school with a diploma. And I wasn't diagnosed until I was 12 years old. So how did I go from there to the person speaking before you today? Well, success doesn't happen on its own or overnight. It takes hard work, determination, and time. For someone on the autism spectrum, like myself, having success took all the hard work, determination, and time, but on a much greater scale, and a whole group of supportive people. In this speech, you will hear about people who told my parents that I would not be able to have the success that I have had. And I am sure there are some of you out there who have children or students who are on the autism spectrum and have been told not to expect a lot from them. My message to you: do not listen to those naysayers. I want to encourage everyone who is on the autism spectrum, as well as parents, friends, and professionals, to never settle for anything less than the best. And there is potential in everyone. Here's the way I was able to do it. How did I go from there to here? I think it comes down to what I like to call my 3 pillars of success. Pillar number 1, you need a strong, motivated advocate who believes in your potential. This could be a parent or professional. Pillar number 2, never settle for good enough. You must set expectations and then be prepared to constantly raise them. And finally, pillar number 3, you need to mobilize and maximize resources. When I started, we had none of these. We developed and refined them throughout my life. In each of these, I have experienced failures and I have experienced triumphs. Let me start from the beginning. I was a full-term healthy baby and the first child in my family. My sister was not born until 4 years after I was. Looking back, there were signs that something was different. I cried from 4 p.m. until I went to sleep exhausted between 9 and 10 at night. But my parents didn't know that this was atypical. I spoke on time, but I was very selective about when and with whom I would interact. I preferred my home environment and showed absolutely no interest in other toddlers at mommy and me. My parents took me to a top diagnostic pediatrician who saw neurological differences, but ruled out autism. This was 1989. The definition of autism was very narrow. There was no spectrum in those days. My hearing was tested, and that was normal. So as you can imagine, it must have been pretty daunting for my parents. Their child is developing and behaving differently, and no one can tell them why. Here's where pillar number 1 comes in: having a strong, motivated advocate. When I was 2 years old, I was playing on the floor, and my mom was cleaning my room one day. And she saw that I wanted a toy off the shelf. However, she ignored me because she was very busy. So I toddled across the house. I got a yardstick from the pantry. I brought it back to my room and used the yardstick to knock the toy I was after off the shelf. And this got my mom's attention. While I may not interact with my peers, at age 2, I was using tools to solve problems. From this point on, my mom wouldn't only allow people to talk about what I couldn't do or didn't do. She knew I was capable. She became a strong, motivated advocate. Everyone that consulted recommended that I be placed in preschool, where it was hoped that I would be able to model the typical behaviors of my peers. We were fortunate enough to find a caring and creative preschool, but they had rarely seen a child who behaved the way I did. Month after month, their frustrations grew. Some said I was a spoiled only child. Others said I was mentally challenged. And yes, they even used the R word. After all, at story time, I would sit with my back to the circle, sort of like this. It's now obvious that I was managing a sensory overload. My mom even told them, "You don't think he's listening, but he is. Ask him a question." And I repeated verbatim what had just been said. For me, this is the beginning of pillar number 2. Not accepting others' conclusions, but setting and constantly raising expectations. Here's an important part to that point. Very early on, it wasn't just my mom who knew I could do what they said I couldn't. I knew it too. We read storybooks at home, and I answered questions. But it took me a while to be able to demonstrate this skill in school. But I knew I was capable. This scenario was played out thousands of times over the next years. But the expectations of success were internalized, and I came to believe in myself. This brings me to pillar number 3, the need to mobilize and maximize resources. And I break these down into 3 areas. Number 1, doctors. Number 2, schools. And finally, number 3, social and extracurricular activities. It began by trying to find the right doctors and to find answers to my different behaviors. Some people like to avoid labeling, but my family never turned away from a label, feeling that if they knew what to call it, I would get services, resources. The pediatric diagnostician said that I was not autistic at age 2. Over the next 10 years, however, speech and language pathologists identified problems with my social and pragmatic skills and recommended and implemented speech and language therapies. A pediatric neurologist diagnosed me with ADD without the HD component. Drug therapies, Ritalin and others, were used with marginal effectiveness. At the same time, the schools provided resources. From the small private preschool, it was recommended that I be placed in public school, where IDEA meant I would receive services. It is here where I met one of the keys to my success. Tommy Warner was head of the special education division for our local elementary school district. She heard the concern in my mom's voice. She came to my preschool and observed, and she sat in one of those tiny little chairs and took notes for hours. And when she got done, she told my mom not to worry. I would receive the help I needed. An IEP was written that would last me all the way through high school. In the spirit of keeping me involved in the world, my parents tried all sorts of outside social activities. For Mommy and me, I took swimming lessons, I tried karate, I enrolled at the YMCA, had a sports coach introduce me to team sports, and I went to our local libraries and to camp. There were times where I may participate for a while, but I always seemed to go back into my own world. When I was 12 years old, I had a motivated advocate. We had set goals and expectations, but all the resources we had gathered up to this point seemed to hit insurmountable roadblocks. My mom says there was one week that summer where she just felt her world come crashing down. The school psychologist recommended that I be placed in a non-diploma certificate program for high school and discontinue some of the services I was receiving on my IEP. The pediatric neurologist, the best in the area, said she had tried everything she knew, all the medicines and therapies, without success. She would think about a referral to another doctor. And then my different, not disruptive, just different behavior got me kicked out of camp. Resources on every level had opted out. And it was a very discouraging time. But as you know, that was not the end of my story. My mom made calls to everyone she could think of. And this led us to Dr. Jim McCracken at UCLA and the Kegel Autism Center at UCSB. Within a week or two, they independently diagnosed me as having Asperger's syndrome, a disorder on the autism spectrum. What a relief. We now had something to call it. There was a way to think about my different behaviors and establish therapies that had been effective with kids like me. Dr. McCracken began prescribing my medication to increase focus and decrease anxiety. At the same time, the Kegels had established behavioral therapies that would eventually teach me how to socialize. They knew what to ask the school district, and my IEP was completely overhauled. From the small self-contained classroom for the communicably handicapped, I went to resource classes, and then eventually all mainstreamed. Gone was the certificate program idea. I was now in college prep classes. I had more targeted speech and language therapies, an inclusion specialist to assist in my integration into the school, and a one-on-one aide. An educational advocate also worked with the IEP to make sure I always had the best program possible. And I began riding horses in 5th grade, which was not only great therapy, but also led to my eventual success on a team sport when I rode varsity my senior year of high school. So resources. When one fails, don't give up. Find the next. With these resources in place, it was time to set new goals. The Kegels were beginning a pilot program at UCSB to admit and support students who are on the high-functioning end of the spectrum like myself. I applied for accommodations to take the SAT and ACT. I had writing tutors to help me write the college application essays. And finally, I was admitted. And what a happy moment it was when we looked online and saw that I was admitted to UCSB. When I started college, I entered a world outside the shelter of my own home. And I faced many new challenges. I had to change my living situation, and that made me uncomfortable. Social expectations had also changed, and I'm still learning that set of rules. But by now, we had the formula. I had motivated advocates all around me. My family and everyone at the Kegel Autism Center knew that I could succeed. Together, we set realistic and attainable goals that would eventually lead to graduation. And we found the resources necessary to support me. Study buddies, peer mentors, note takers, assistance with housing, the Disabled Students Program, the Autism Center, and my family all had their parts. I graduated after 5 years at UCSB with my degree in sociology. As I told you when I began, now that I graduated, I live independently, I have a job, and I very much enjoy speaking to people like you. This process, as I described, will go on for the rest of my life. I must constantly reassess my goals and find the resources necessary to help me support them. By the way, those two people pictured there, that's Bob and Lynn Cagle, who I've been telling you all about. They have been instrumental in my success. After graduation and after finishing that job at the camp, I moved back to Westlake. I lived there in a shared townhouse with a friend, and I work as a marketing agent at a small mortgage company. What I'll do is I'll make flyers with our name on them and send them to realtors around the area in hopes that the realtors will send us their buyers to get a mortgage. But I did make a promise to my friends at UCSB and the Cagle Autism Center that I would always come up and visit whenever I could. And that is a promise that I have kept to this day. In fact, whenever I go up there, my friends at the Cagle Center and I will go out to dinner at one of Santa Barbara's many eclectic restaurants, or we'll go get coffee at one of their many unique coffee houses. But I also see a clinician as well for an hour when I go up and visit. For a year or so, the California Department of Rehabilitation was providing funding for the services. But when that funding ran out, we pursued insurance funding. I'll work with a clinician on techniques such as managing anxiety, and we even developed a question bank with 50 questions to improve my conversational skills. So rather than just asking, how are you doing all the time, I ask a different question every time I see someone. I'll probably have services like this the rest of my life, as even these basic skills do not come naturally to someone on the spectrum like myself. In the future, I'd like to continue to give speeches about autism spectrum disorders and give hope to people who are on the spectrum or any type of disability like myself. You can visit my website, successontheautismspectrum.com. It's all one word, lowercase. In fact, I'll give it to you. In fact, I'll put it on a slide in the end. Another thing I'd like to do is own my own marketing business to employ people who have special needs. And if the right woman comes along, I'd like to get married and have my own family. I think it's important to talk about research related to college and autism spectrum disorders. There are a higher proportion of people who have ASD and have expressed interest in attending college and graduating than actually do. There needs to be more support at more colleges for people who have ASD. In summary, college was a time where I went from living a sheltered life to living in the real world. I know I couldn't have done it without the supports of so many people. I know that you either know someone, work with someone, or have children who are on the autism spectrum. And I encourage you, whether you're a parent, educator, or administrator, to be the one who helps them succeed. Be the one who helps them succeed in that first mainstream class, helps them get into college, or even helps them get a job. Whatever they can do, you can make a difference. I'd like to thank those who helped me in my pre-college career, as well as those who helped me succeed at UCSB and continue to do so today. It gives me great pleasure to speak to all of you today, and I hope that you will all leave this meeting thinking about how you can make a difference in the life of somebody who is on the spectrum. Going back to my 3 pillars, please remember to be a motivated advocate. Help set high expectations and goals. Don't be afraid to reassess. And finally, be persistent and creative in putting together resources to meet those goals. You can make a difference in the life of somebody who is on the spectrum. And who knows, they may end up changing the world. The only thing that would hold back somebody like me from succeeding is having people tell me what I can't do rather than what I can do. They think success is impossible. I'm proof that they're wrong. Thank you for listening.